Welcome back, everyone. Let me introduce our panel of experts now for what should be a rather lively discussion today. We'll start on the far end with Pat Shea. Pat is a former attorney in Utah. He is a professor of biology, research professor at the U of U. But most importantly today, he was the director of the BLM on the national level during the Clinton years. So thank you, Pat, for joining us. Also, next to Pat here is Randy Parker. He is the CEO of the Utah Farm Bureau, a group that understands the land because they work with the land, the farmers and ranchers of Utah. And sitting right next to me is John Harja, the governor's director of public lands. Thank you all for being here. Pat, let's start with you. The Take Back Utah is an issue of reclaiming Utah from federal governmental control. Many argue there is too much governmental control at the federal level and that the states can do it better. What is your opinion? Is federal control of Utah land a good thing? Is it necessary?
I think it's necessary given the spaces that we have, the resources that have been paid by the federal government for more than 115 years since statehood and even before that. You know, President Obama said an interesting thing last night in memorializing the 30 SEALs that were killed. And he said, you know, we have to think of ourselves as a team. We're no longer able to divide between this side or that side. In Utah, I always joke that whenever I am someplace, one time I was in Nepal hiking through the Himalayas and I met somebody from Utah. Nobody asked me where I was in school or what job I had. It was, what high school did you go to? And I think, unfortunately, all too often we get into this high school mentality of my team versus your team. And with public lands, it's really a question of managing them together. And there are certain federal laws that will preempt state law, as there should be. And there are certain times that local ordinances or county ordinances or public health standards will preempt federal law. So I think there's a balance there, and I think we need to get on with business rather than holding rallies that don't go anywhere.
John Harja, obviously your team is the different team than Pat. Do you see it that way, as my team versus your team, or are you looking for cooperation? Or would you prefer just total state control?
I think there's a lot of room for more state control. I think the Department of Defense is the proper entity to defend our country. I think you should look at whether Utah has a AAA rating right now, but I was informed this morning it should be bigger than that if they had something higher than that, as opposed to the federal government's standard. So local control, I think that's the way the country was put together, and I think there's a lot of room for the state to manage these lands more efficiently than the federal government. For example, the Forest Service manages lands up in the Northwest at a cost about quadruple what the state can do it for. So there's a lot of room for state improvement on the federal situation.
So would you prefer that the state take over all National Forest Service lands too in Utah and manage them that way?
There's no difference in that sense between the Forest Service or anything else. I mean, I think the parks, or national parks, are certainly gems that should stay the way they are, but there's room for improvement in the Forest Service and the BLM.
Randy, your group actually works with the land. You're probably closer to the land than any other occupation, the farmers and ranchers. Which would you prefer, federal control, state control, or does it make any difference?
Well, we would certainly like that government that's closest to us and closest to the people, and that's local government and state government. Going back and looking at fundamental principles, the founders said all of the states should enter the union equal to one another. And we feel a lot of times we're nothing more than a possession to be dictated to by Washington, D.C. When you draw a line down through the country at Denver, 4% of the land base east of Denver is federal government owned, 60% west of Denver is federal government owned. There's something wrong with that picture. Allowing states and industries to benefit from those decisions closest to the land. Ronald Reagan said the federal bureaucrats don't know whether they're landlord or king or Republican. A Democrat, Richard Lamb, said with all the vast holdings of the federal government, we can't control our own destiny. This is not a partisan issue. This is about what's right for our future.
Pat, is there a reason for the federal government owning such a large percentage of the West as opposed to the East?
Absolutely. It's called history. And to correct John, the founding fathers tried a decentralized form of government in the Articles of Confederation. It failed miserably because the states couldn't agree on commonality. If you really believe in what John and Randy are talking about, don't drive on any of your highways, don't use any gas, don't rely on any FAA for your flight protection or safety when you're flying. We need common denominators. And the reason, Randy, that 60% of the land west of Denver is publicly owned is for many, many years nobody wanted it. And the place in the east, beginning with Madison and Jefferson, with the cadastral survey that they founded in 1789, was to find a way of making an orderly transition so that public lands could be converted into productive private lands. And I would argue that in a state that unfortunately has had too many scandals where people have been willing to pay to play, they are not properly governing those public lands. They would be squandered away to the highest bidder rather than for legacies for future generations.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's go back to the 70s when a lot of the environmental legislation was put on the books in this country. At that time, America produced all of its wood needs for building, for construction, for all of what we needed as a country during the 70s and 80s. Only 35% of our energy needs came from offshore. The BLM and the Forest Service control vast amounts of resources, oil and gas and timber. Today, 65% of our energy needs are imported from other countries. 70% of the wood that we use in this country for building material and so forth is imported. We don't want to go there any longer as a state or as a nation.
Well, if federal lands were to revert to Utah control, would there be a sell-off of these public lands? Would they be sold to oil development, mining, logging industries?
I doubt it. I can't say for sure, of course. That would be a legislative decision, but I think Mr. Shea has simply misinterpreted what I said. The lands can be better managed by the state government, local government. It's better managed by local control. We have to consider larger needs, of course, but we need to be able to get to the oil and gas. We need to be able to get to the timber, as Randy said, and there's more efficient ways of doing that I think the state is better positioned to do, and that's what we've been driving for.
But Terry, let's take a great example of local control, public education. Is Utah number 1? Are we number 25? No, we are number 52 behind Puerto Rico and other undeveloped areas because the state has not paid for public education.
Because 70% of our land is owned by the government. If we had the same rights as Texas with 98%, we could put more student investment.
But Randy, you're aware of payment in lieu of taxes. That's a bogus argument.
That's a pittance towards compared to...
Excuse me, 30 million?
That's a pittance compared to property taxes.
Well, I wouldn't disagree about property taxes, but if you're talking about state management,
let's talk about
there are better things that could be done in terms of how we provide. Do you mind if I finish speaking, John?
I'm tired of your constantly interrupting things.
Well, I think I was talking, but you may have a hard time hearing.
Well, let's talk about the forest.
I'll tell you, gentlemen, I'll tell you what I'm going to have to do here. I'm going to have to interrupt because we do have to take a commercial break, and then we'll get right back to this. The lands issue always has been a hot issue in the state of Utah. We'll find out a little bit more of what could become of our lands, one way or another, when we come back.
What are the words that describe the perfect destination? Finding them all in one place is easy if you know where to look. Join us for the 15th Annual Old Capitol Arts and Living History Festival, September 9th and 10th in Fillmore, Utah. Fine art, mountain men demonstrations, and live entertainment are just a few of the attractions. Pick your adventure in Millard County, Utah.
Imagine a place where the world's largest concentration of scenic attractions can be found, where radiant cliffs of 2 national parks and 3 state parks tower to kiss the azure sky. Come and visit any one of the many memorable sites and events that Bryce Canyon Country, Garfield County, Utah has to offer. Drive along National Scenic Byway 143 and All-American Road Highway 12 and experience the ultimate adventure.
If you look up epic in the dictionary, it's defined as heroic, majestic, or impressively great. Here in Kane County, Utah, we don't need a dictionary to tell us that. We live it every day. Stop reading about life and start experiencing it in Kane County. ATV adventures, Jeep excursions, hike a world where the Old West was yesterday and tomorrow is just over the horizon. Kane County, Utah, where epic is more than just a word, it's our way of life.
How would you spend an extra day in Utah Valley? Stay one more day. Visit utahvalley.com to make reservations. Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.